You're a huge fan of the slow eccentric, of the big stretch. Why is it so important? And what's the difference between the eccentric and, the isometric or concentric?
Yes, the first thing I'll say, it's not very important. It's just a little bit important.
Okay.
But it's one of these things that if you know it and you do it, it's such a huge trade-off in the side of the beneficial, and there's almost no downside, that it's kind of like a real easy thing that you can do. I'll give you what's a good analogy. If you're cooking food, but you've never used like salt, onions, or garlic, and people are going to be like, dude, it's not rocket science. Just do it. And you're like, why? What's the complex reasoning? You're like, it's just going to make your food taste better. And you try it, you're like, oh, and these things are so cheap and it's so easy to put them in food. What have I been doing my whole life? Now, can you eat food without onions, garlic, and salt? Yeah. Can you have food taste pretty good? Sure, there's ways of doing that. But like, why go out of the way? So the eccentric research seems to indicate that it might be a little bit more of all the three parts of the movement, the eccentric being the way down, the isometric being at the top or bottom of the lift, and the concentric being on the way up. The eccentric seems to be probably a little bit more impactful for hypertrophy. But there are better reasons than that. Because you're like, oh, a little bit more, but if I do less eccentric, I can do more concentric reps because I save my energy. That's totally true. Slower eccentric has a couple of other benefits that are really, really awesome, and just kind of like, once you know them, you're like, oh, shit, why wouldn't I use this? One of them is that eccentric part of the lift doesn't take as much nervous system drive. So it actually tires you out less. So if you have a set on which you are mostly riding out slow eccentrics and then quickly doing the concentric and then slowly riding out the eccentric, that set is going to fatigue you less than a set in which you're dumping the bar into yourself and just crushing out as many concentrics as you can. Like CrossFit style, that shit is hard. Like it actually just beats you up more from a nervous system perspective. You have to try harder. Your nervous system works harder on a concentric phase than eccentric, which is why EMGs, the little sensory pads they put on you to detect muscular activity, don't seem to detect a whole lot of activity or nearly as much in an eccentric phase as in a concentric. And then they say, well, this doesn't activate that muscle as much. Like, well, it sure shit does. It's just not through the nervous system. But the muscle uses its own passive tension and its own internal tension. With some degree of activation, you can get a ton of force throughput in an eccentric, which means it's a very efficient way to train, a very economical way to train. For how hard you have to try, you get bigger benefits from the eccentric. So that's a big deal. Like, shit, if I can work, like, not nearly as hard. Like, I did all the work to get the bar up here. Why don't I catch all the growth I got coming to me by taking it down slowly? And also, it's going to tire me out less, so I can do more reps and more sets to get the same effect. And then in addition to that, a slow eccentric minimizes injury risk, because injury risk is quite high if you really rapidly change at the bottom or dump the bar and it gets off position. But a slower eccentric keeps you in a very good position. It lowers the velocities of movement, and movement velocities are one of the most correlated variables to injury. Like, one of the most injurious sports is the sport of cheerleading in America. Why? Because when the girls are basket tossed style and come down 10 meters, your velocity hitting the ground at 10 meters is like insanely high. It's higher than you would be able to propel yourself. Your ass is getting hurt for sure. But if you're lowering even hundreds of pounds slowly in an eccentric and you push back up, usually you're just like, I just can't do this anymore. I'm not going to get hurt. But the more dynamic something is, the more injurious it is. So if slowing the eccentric maybe grows a little bit more muscle rep per rep, definitely requires less effort neurologically to train just as hard, and minimizes injury risk, at least a little bit. I'm talking about, all right, there's 3 benefits, and then you say, okay, what are the downsides? You get fewer reps in a set. So, well, I don't know, like the girl over there that's just counting your reps, she's like, all right, if he gets 15 reps with this, I'm for sure giving it up. I'm just going to pull him into the bathroom. We're going to do this. But if it's 14 or less, I'm never going to speak to him again. That doesn't happen. Nobody cares. You know the Jurassic Park meme, the fat guy from Jurassic Park? He's like, see, nobody cares. That's just it. So it ends up being like there are really no downsides from a hypertrophy training perspective, and just like small, notable upsides, but there's like 3 of them. And then that adds up to like, this is a really good idea. It's more, imagine you saw someone walking around with no shoes. And you were like, have you considered shoes? And they're like, is it going to change everything completely? Will I be able to get to where I need to go faster? You're like, No. But trust me, you put on some shoes, they make it more comfortable. Your feet don't get hurt as often. Your feet probably won't get hurt very often if you have nice soles, but every now and again they will. So just put on some shoes and see if you like it. And they're going to put on some shoes and be like, bro, this is the next level. This is awesome. And you're going to be like, see, it's not night and day, but it's just better. It's just better. And so, you're like, why not do it? That's just generally my thing. And with injury, if you can bring injury risk down a little bit, like, who wants to get hurt? Why would you want to get hurt? Now, I would understand if there was a nuanced discussion of, now look, like, quick eccentrics have some upsides, but for hypertrophy training, well, gee whiz, they just really don't. You know, it's like if it's all positives and basically no negatives, it's like having friends over and they're like, why isn't your food flavored? And you're like, should I consider flavoring my food? And they're like, yes. There's just, the downside is it costs $1 to buy food flavoring. And the upside is like 1,000,000 times bigger than that. So, ta-da.
So what about the soreness aspect of training with slow eccentrics? Because I personally feel that to be much more DOMS, like in my, like, for example, yesterday I did a push workout and my chest is like screaming.
Blown up.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's really sore because at the moment I'm doing 4 to 5 seconds, like on the way down to really try and emphasize it. Like, is that a trade-off that you consider? Because I definitely don't feel as sore when I have, like, let's say a 2-second lowering of the weight.
Yeah. No, I don't. I think that is indicative of a good thing. And because there's not a ton of direct literature to confirm this yet, I have to be very careful how I say this, but I suspect that the growth benefit of slower eccentrics is actually quite modest, not just small. And I think that reflects itself in the degree of soreness that you get. I challenge you to think of a situation in which more DOMS doesn't correlate to more growth. Have you ever heard of a situation in which someone's getting more DOMS, but that doesn't correlate somehow to the mechanisms of more growth? So, for example, people used to say, well, DOMS is just something you get if you're novel, like new to training. So, okay, who grows more from training? People new to training or people who have been training a while? Okay, new people. Okay, sweet.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Good. Another one is like, you can see if you targeted the muscle properly. If you do a lot of slow eccentrics for your biceps and you don't get sore, you'd be like, am I really using my biceps in this? And maybe it's just forearms. You know, sometimes you curl and it's just mostly forearms and you're like, ah. Another one is like, people used to say, okay, at long muscle lengths, training at a stretch really gives you DOMS. And that's kind of a curiosity of training at a stretch. So don't worry about DOMS because it's just something that happens when you stretch or when you're new. But now we learn that training at a stretch is superior for hypertrophy. So it's like, oh, interesting. And it also conveys a lot of DOMS. So I'm not saying the more DOMS you can get, the better. But if you're getting some good, robust DOMs from doing even less of the work, or just the same amount of work, you're probably getting more growth. And that's a really great thing. Can you imagine if I'm all Dr. Mike and shit, and you see my videos on YouTube and shit, and you're like, I'm going to try the slow eccentric bullshit, I'm going to try it. And instead of you getting more sore from it, you got less sore. You got less tired. You didn't feel like the muscles were really trained all that hard. Would you be more likely to be like, yeah, this is awesome, I love it? No, you'd be like, I don't know, it's not quite hitting the spot. But if you get really, really sore in your quads from doing it, or your triceps or your chest, you're like, man, some shit happened to my muscles. This definitely fucks up my muscles a lot. And if you're saying, oh, now I'm too sore, why don't you just do fewer sets? Then now we have a really amazing thing. You do fewer sets and you get as much growth as you used to be getting doing more sets. And you don't have to try as hard from a nervous system perspective because the concentric's more difficult than the eccentric. It might be actually a pretty big deal all around, where it's like, you know, something's just so goddamn good, you don't need forever of it to make you super happy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm doing less sets than I've probably ever done before, and I feel like, yeah, I'm getting, well, it's hard to say because it's a new phase of training. It's like a new meso that I'm doing. It's hard to say that I'm growing the most I've ever grown, but
you can't say that.
Yeah,
totally.
As a person that's lifted since I was 14, it's pretty hard to find those extra things that are unturned. So
yes,
it's feeling very good.
Your proxies for how your exercises are making you feel, how your workouts are making you feel, are definitely trending in the right direction. I mean, if you like have to do less work and you get just as fucked up in the target muscle, but your joints feel good, your nervous system feels good, this is a really good sign. If this keeps going, I might see at least comparable growth for less effort, or even more growth if I can recover from it. You know what I mean?
It's just very challenging mentally as well, because you're like, you feel like you should be smashing yourself harder, especially if you've trained in the gym for a while. You're like, I'm doing 3 sets of 8, 5 seconds down, 1 up, and you're used to doing, whatever, what I did when I kind of like originally started the whole,
Oh, yeah.
you know, you do 5
20
by
sets of
5 or you do
everything.
6
Yeah.
sets of 6 and you're
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely crushing the bench press. And then, you know, now you're doing 3 sets of 8 and walking out and you feel, you know, just as good. You know, obviously it feels like a more intelligent way to train.